A few hours ago, I sat down with President Trump in the diplomatic room at the White House. We talked DOGE, China, illegal immigration. He even told us what he sees for Barron's future. But we start tonight with the big news, his conversation with Vladimir Putin. Mr. President, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We got a readout of your call with Vladimir Putin, and it was a fairly optimistic take. Vladimir Putin agreed to a ceasefire immediately on energy and infrastructure,
right,
but not to a 30-day ceasefire. Tell us what happened.
Well, you have a situation where you have a lot of guns pointing at each other foolishly, because it would have never happened if I were president. That was not a war that was supposed to happen, and it did happen. So that's where we are. And right now, you have a lot of guns pointing at each other, and a ceasefire without going a little bit further would have been tough. Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers. They're nicely encircled, and that's not good. And we want to get it over with. Look, we're doing this. There are no Americans involved. There could be if you end up in World War III over this, which is so ridiculous. But, you know, strange things happen. And I think we had a great call. It lasted almost 2 hours. Talked about a lot of things and toward getting it to peace. And we talked about other things also.
Was there non-negotiables mentioned by Putin? It was reported that I think the Kremlin media actually stated that he demanded an immediate cessation of aid to Ukraine in order to get to this multi-step deal.
No, he didn't. We didn't talk about aid, actually. We didn't talk about aid at all. We talked about a lot of things, but aid was never discussed.
In the readout, it also stated that both sides want to get to an improved bilateral relationship, the United States and Russia.
That's true.
How can we trust that Vladimir Putin actually wants that, in that he's not also being influenced at the same time by his close friend, President Xi of China?
Well, look, we have our own discussions with President Xi of China, and he wants to get along also, and he's looking to get along, and we're looking to get along with him, and we will. We have a problem of trade where we have a very big imbalance with China. With Russia, we don't have that much trade, and they'd like to, and we'd like to also. They have some very valuable things for us, including very big forms of rare earth. They have a lot of earth. You know, they have a big chunk of real estate, the biggest, actually the biggest in the world for a country, by far. And on that, they have things that we could use, frankly, and that other people could use. I think that President Xi would like to get along, and I think Russia wants to get along with the United States. I also think we're a much different country than we were just a few months ago. We're a country that's now respected. We were not respected. We were being laughed at. We had incompetent leadership. This was a war, as an example, that would have never happened if I were president.
Is part of your desire to forge this new relationship with Russia also impacted by Russia's closer relationship since you left office in 2021 with China? Because I think you talked about before the desire to box out China from that part of the world and have a closer relationship with Russia.
So as a student of history, which I am, and I've watched it all, the first thing you learn is you don't want Russia and China to get together. With that being said, no, it's not a big part of it, but maybe that'll happen or maybe it won't. Obama really forced them together through energy and bad energy policies. And when he did so many different things, he forced a marriage which would never have taken place. It was not a natural. And for one reason, Russia has tremendous land, a lot of land, and China doesn't have enough land. Russia has a much smaller population than China. And it's sort of a natural, it was always a natural enemy situation. They're probably friendly now, but we're going to be friendly with both. I think we're going to be friendly with both. China needs us in terms of trade very badly, but we have to straighten out the deficit. We have now more than $1 trillion deficit with China. It's not even believable. And we're going to be doing something about that. And with Russia, they would like to have some of our economic power.
The criticism that you've heard since really 2015 is that you have more in common with Vladimir Putin than you do with globalist leaders, maybe some NATO leaders, and in this case, with Zelensky. You're both nationalists. Zelensky's more of a globalist. How do you respond to that criticism?
Well, I am a nationalist, but I'm a nationalist for the United States, not for anybody else. And it's interesting because there's nobody been tougher on Russia than me. I'm the one that pointed out Nord Stream 2, and I stopped it. Nord Stream's the biggest pipeline, I guess, in the world, taking care of all of Europe. And it was being built from before I got there. And somehow they were on the way. It was going to be, and I stopped it. It was just stone cold dead. I stopped it in its tracks. That's not somebody that's being particularly nice. It was the biggest project they ever had. I had it stopped. When Biden got in, he immediately approved it, like immediately. One of the first things he did in office was he approved Nord Stream 2. Nobody ever heard of Nord Stream 2 until I was president. I said, what are you doing? You mean you're building a pipeline to Germany and various places in Europe. You're paying them billions of dollars a month, and then we're paying a lot of money to fight them. This is not going to work out well. And it stopped, and then Biden approved it, which was a really stupid thing to do, but he did it. And Putin actually said to me, if you're my friend, I'd hate to see you as my enemy. He said that very strongly. But with all of that, I had a very good relationship with Putin. I had a very good relationship with President Xi, a very good relationship with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Lots of good relationships. And that's a positive thing. That's not a negative thing. But at the same time, I'm about our country. So that's why we're talking about tariffs. We'll be taking in trillions of dollars.
I want to get to the tariffs in a minute because we're going to first hit the other big news of the day, which was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court issued what a rare statement about your suggestion on Truth that you posted earlier today that Judge James Boasberg should be impeached after he ordered those deportation flights to El Salvador halted, essentially turned around. The Chief Justice said it was more than two centuries. We understood that essentially impeachment was for very rare circumstances and not an appropriate response to rulings you disagree with. What's your reaction to the courts stepping in to make a statement here? They didn't make a statement when Joe Biden decided to forgive all those student loans.
Well, he didn't mention my name in the statement. I just saw it quickly. He didn't mention my name. Yeah. But many people have called for his impeachment, the impeachment of this judge. I don't know who the judge is, but he's radical left. He was Obama appointed. And he actually said we shouldn't be able to take criminals, killers, murderers, horrible, the worst people, gang members, gang leaders, that we shouldn't be allowed to take them out of our country. Well, that's a presidential job. That's not for a local judge to be making that determination. And I thought it was terrible. In fact, he said when they were well on their way, there was an order issued, as I understand it, to bring them back or to not let them go or something. And this is not something that the country would stand for. These people, they were let in here by an incompetent president who had open borders, and anybody throughout the world could come in. And we were given murderers. We were given people from mental institutions and prisons.
The judge is essentially saying, excuse me, Mr. President, that there still is a process in place. You can read between the lines. It hasn't been a full ruling yet. And I know the Justice Department is appealing this on a couple of different grounds. But this is leading people to wonder whether there are court orders that you will defy because you believe that the judge has no jurisdiction or they're political questions and not justiciable at all. And what would you say to that? Are there circumstances where you would defy a court order?
Well, I think that, number one, nobody's been through more courts than I have. I think nobody knows the courts any better than I have. I would say the chief judge does, but nobody knows them better than I have. And what they've done to me, I've had the worst judges. I've had crooked judges. I have judges that valued Mar-a-Lago at $18 million because that benefited his case, because he wanted to see me convicted of something. I have judges that had relatives making millions and millions of dollars on the election, ruling on the election.
But going forward,
I had judges that were so corrupt.
Because we all know that was outrageous.
I never did defy a court order.
And you wouldn't in the future?
No, you can't do that. However, we have bad judges. We have very bad judges. And these are judges that shouldn't be allowed. I think at a certain point, you have to start looking at what do you do when you have a rogue judge. The judge that we're talking about, you look at his other rulings, I mean, rulings unrelated, but having to do with me, he's a lunatic.
He wants details of when flights departed and trying to, I guess they seem to be trying to lay the predicate for your administration having defied a court.
He fought on the front lines in Ukraine for nearly 3 years as part of the elite Da Vinci Wolves Battalion, seeing some of the war's bloodiest, most horrific battles all the way from 2022 until just this January. This video shows him in a trench as Russian artillery rounds were raining down on him and his battalion. These images show the two cousins back in the day vacationing together. Through the years, Nate and JD share grandparents. JD's mother and Nate's father are siblings. And Nate Vance is out front now. Nate, I really appreciate your talking, and I want to get to exactly why you're speaking out, because I know you do so after careful consideration. So, Nate, I know you call yourself a Republican-leaning independent. I know you've been supportive at times of the Trump administration. But on this issue of Ukraine, where you have put so much of your life over these past few years, you think your cousin is misguided. How come?
Excuse me. Well, I think my experience in Ukraine has given me a unique perspective that most Americans don't have. There are certainly cultural differences both between the Ukrainians and Americans and the Russians. And I think if you try to deal with Russia through an American lens, it will come back to bite you. They don't necessarily think like we think. And I'm talking about their political class. I've personally witnessed them shooting their own troops on enough occasions that it wasn't just an isolated incident. It's happened quite a bit, enough to the point where you could consider it to be policy if troops are retreating. So these people, as a policy, will eat their own. So they will not hesitate to eat an American president or American vice president. They don't care what we think. They're not our allies, and they never will be, not at least for a generation.
I know that you've tried to reach out to your cousin since he took office, but haven't been successful. I mean, what were you planning to say to him? I mean, what do you want to say to him now in this moment?
Well, look, I mean, there's more than one reason why you could make the argument for supporting Ukraine. There's the, kind of emotional argument, the human element argument part of it, which, fine, if that's the argument you want to make in order to support Ukraine, then I support that. There's also the element of how it will affect the United States long term, right? So if you're just more transactional in nature and you are concerned, what is the benefit for the United States?
My hope is that this all can be reset and maturity can kick in and some pragmatism, because this war tonight, people will die in Ukraine. Tonight, people will die in this conflict. We're trying to bring an end to this conflict, which is unsustainable. It's an unsustainable, bloody war that has to come to an end.
So what you have is the North American car industry is now going to be discriminated against, and who's going to benefit? The German car industry, the Korean car industry, the Japanese car industry, because those cars were coming to America tariff-free. It's a very strange, self-defeating set of tariffs, because the U.S. has built over the last 30 years a really remarkable integrated economy with Canada and Mexico. It's in many ways more dynamic than the European Union.
Now, the legal pretext your government is using to bring in these tariffs is that Canada is apparently unwilling to help in the fight against illegal fentanyl. Well, that is totally false. Let's look at the facts. Our border is already safe and secure. Far less than 1% of fentanyl flows and less than 1% of illegal crossings into the United States comes from Canada.
I mean, thousands of people have been killed, thousands. And he talks about all these horrible things that have happened to prisoners of war and children, all true, all bad. This is what we're dealing with here. It needs to come to an end. We are trying to bring it to an end. The way you bring it to an end is you get Russia to the table to talk. And he understands that.
You could see a completely different tone where Prime Minister Starmer leaving 10 Downing Street, walking towards Zelensky to welcome him. The two embraced, they shook hands, had smiles, and then before entering Downing Street, they sort of stood there, had a little banter, smiling, shaking hands before going inside.
We know that there's a scourge of fentanyl in North America. We know that too many Canadians and American lives are being taken by this catastrophic drug. But fundamentally, we have a very strong and secure border. We have $1.3 billion worth of investment in our new border plan. We've invested in more boots on the ground, Black Hawk helicopters, a new fentanyl strike force with the Americans. We also have a new fentanyl czar.
Just moments ago, Ukrainian President Zelensky says security guarantees from the U.S. as a result of a new mineral deal could be the first step towards peace.
If we understand that the US will be one of the countries or one of the leading countries who give security guarantees, then this could be a success or the first step towards the sustainable fair peace growth of the Ukrainian economy. Or if it's just some sort of beginning without a vision for the end.
So what you have is the North American car industry is now going to be discriminated against, and who's going to benefit? The German car industry, the Korean car industry, the Japanese car industry, because those cars were coming to America tariff-free. It's a very strange, self-defeating set of tariffs, because the U.S. has built over the last 30 years a really remarkable integrated economy with Canada and Mexico. It's in many ways more dynamic than the European Union.
But there has been absolutely no indication of any change at all in President Putin's worldview, which is that he doesn't believe Ukraine is a country. He doesn't believe it has a right to exist. And he basically has never gone back from his saying that he basically wants all of Ukraine. And if he doesn't have it territorially, he wants to have a government in Kyiv which will bend to his will.
Can the U.S. overcome this tariff storm? Will Trump's trade decisions help the U.S. economy recover, or will they lead the country into a prolonged recession? Trump shocks America with a 200% wine tariff. How will Americans react? Can you imagine walking into a supermarket one day and realizing your favorite bottle of wine now costs 3 times as much? This is no longer a hypothetical scenario. How will Americans react? Can you imagine walking into a supermarket one day and realizing your favorite bottle of wine now costs 3 times as much? This is no longer a hypothetical scenario. Trump has just announced a staggering 200% tariff on wine and champagne from Europe, a decision that has sent shockwaves across the country, pushing millions of Americans into even greater financial strain as prices continue to soar. Trump sparks controversy with a 200% tariff.